Hey guys, welcome back to Dixville the podcast. I'm your host, Scott Fraser, and I believe this is our 7th episode. It's the second part of our talk with NICOLA SCOTT, the comic book artist. We left off halfway through her story, so I'm quite keen just to jump right back in it. So if you haven't listened to the first one, then maybe go back and do it, and then jump back into this one. But if you've listened to last week's episode, then let's go.
Thread took off, and out of that, Wizard magazine, which was still going at the time, they contacted me to do an interview on me and labelled me as a talent to watch, which was sort of a big deal. Mm-hmm. And because of that thread, Gail and Greg in particular started campaigning with their editors for me to work with them.
On Wonder Woman and what was Gail working on?
Birds
something?
of Prey.
Yeah, wow.
And through that Wizard article, I got invited to a convention in Canada as a guest where they were doing a Women in Comics symposium.
And were you in Sydney or New York?
I was in Sydney.
Yep, but bouncing.
Yeah, I was only going over once a year.
Okay.
But so I got to go to this convention in Canada where I actually got to meet Gail and I got to meet Greg. And, you know, it was very sort of that sort of early superficial meeting, you know, oh, hello, you know, I've seen your artwork online, It's very nice. And having some sort of chats where I feel like I made a nice connection with both of them. And they both continued to campaign on my behalf to get me on their books. And a few months later, I was at San Diego. And I'd just been to New York the week before the San Diego show, and I went into the DC office, and I met with the Wonder Woman editor, who was very familiar with me because Greg had been sort of hassling, and he was like, "It's very nice, but you're a little bit green."
What was that like, though, walking into the
terrifying
the DC office with the editor of Wonder Woman comics?
Terrifying. But I met quite a few editors that trip, that day, when I went in there, because I had gone in under the invitation of an editor called Joey Cavalieri, who I'd met every year at San Diego, who's one of the first editors that I saw, that I was introduced to by Jimmy Palmiotti, and he'd been very generous with his time, and when I was in New York, he'd said, you should come into the office, and I showed him my portfolio, and he was like, this is great, you know, it's all very nice, and, you know, any other editors you want to meet while you're here? And I was, no idea, I was totally terrified and really scared, because, you know, I still really didn't know what I was doing.
Yeah.
Even though I'd sort of been on this very steep learning curve for 4 years. But he introduced me to a number of editors, and that was really lovely. And sort of encouraging, and I felt like I was at the point where they were aware of me, and they were sort of, you know, that they were aware of me enough that, you know, there was one editor in particular, Eddie Berganza, who was like, I had seen him every year, and he had said to me that year, I've seen you every year, Nicola, and every year you're back here, and every year you've got a portfolio and it's better than the year before, and you've listened to the constructive criticism, you've taken people's advice. I trust you now. You know, it had taken...
So 4 years, that's really a long time to get a job.
Well, to get the trophy job, I don't think it's that long.
Yeah.
You know, I felt like I had gone into it feeling like my first few years where I really didn't know what I was doing. I was doing an apprenticeship.
I guess it's comparable to starting off as a junior in like a design firm.
Exactly.
And then you're senior designer or art director.
Yeah, you know, I felt like I was doing an apprenticeship where I was learning the art and craft of the field that I had decided I was going to work in.
Because it's weird, isn't it? It's not just the art of storytelling through comics, but you're also learning the industry.
Yeah, learning the industry, which
and all the
when you're on the other side of the world,
60 years of publishing baggage of these stories.
Yeah. And it was a very surreal experience going into that office. But
did you have that moment where you thought, this is it? Like, not that this is it, I'm here, but this is, I'm here, DC editor.
This is
Wonder
the place.
Woman.
Yeah. I felt convinced that this was the place. And I wasn't sure if the time was right, but I felt like this is the place.
Yep.
And the next week I was at San Diego at the big Comic-Con convention. And
what year was that?
It's 2006.
Okay.
And it was Sunday on the last day. I'd had sort of a number of nibbles from a number of companies on sort of projects that, might be coming up. And that was kind of the nature of how things were going at the time. I wasn't quite supporting myself off the work, but I was making a good second income from it. And
sorry.
Yeah.
Was that all like cash in hand?
No.
So how did that work, you working freelance contract in the States but not being an American citizen? Like a boring question, but...
well, it was sort of different for each company. I'd sort of... I didn't... Because I was international at the time, a number of American publishers were used to working with people from the UK, but they were just at the point of branching out into a whole lot of different creative markets. There's now a lot of South American artists,
yep.
a lot of Asian artists working in the industry, and this was round about the same time.
And working remotely.
They were starting to venture out into the greater world. Okay. And so they would just pay me by check. It would all sort of be on the books for them. And
you were back in Sydney.
I was back in Sydney, and I would just have to, bank the checks here and
yep.
pay tax on it as income.
Yep. Okay. Yep.
And that's how it'd been going sort of for the 2 years leading up to that. And on the Sunday, so it was the last day, Gail Simone came running up to me. It was like 4:00 in the afternoon. So it's the end of the show. It's all winding down. I'm about to leave. She came running up to me saying, "Oh my God, I think there's going to be an opening on Birds of Prey," which was one of the books that she was writing.
And Birds of Prey, if you don't know, is like Batgirl.
At the time, it was The Huntress and Black Canary. It was
yep.
like sort of street level.
All chicks.
Chick book, yeah. It was a girl teen book with sort of street level powers.
Pretty big title.
Pretty big title for a girl readership.
Yep.
And Gail had really sort of turned the book around and turned it into something really quite special.
Yeah.
And she said, "You need to go and speak to Mike Carlin, who was the editor of the book at the time. And he was one of the few DC editors that I didn't know." And so she pointed him out to me. She said, "That's him over there." And so I went over to him and I introduced myself. No, she didn't go over and introduce her. She pointed me. She said, "Go
talk to that guy."
Yeah, so I did. A bit terrified, and I introduced myself to him and I said, "Hi, I'm NICOLA SCOTT," and he said, "I know who you are," which was a little bit scary. I was like, "Oh shit, what have you heard?" And he sort of very casually, without really looking at it terribly much, flipped through my portfolio. But kind of more talking to me.
So each year you went back to San Diego with your folio.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And each year after that first year, for the 3 years after that, I came away with a job from the show. I'd sort of get a job, on the floor. And this year was one of those years that happened as well. And he just sort of said, "You're a Birds of Prey kind of girl." And I was like, I'm a redhead with glasses. I reckon I am, because the lead character is redhead with glasses. And he was like, "Okay, I've never worked with anyone from Australia before, so let's see how this goes." And I didn't know what that meant. He just said, "I'll send you an issue. How quickly can you start?" And I was like, "Well, I'm flying home tomorrow," which means I arrive in, I started confusing him with time zone differences and stuff. But I said, essentially, I can start straight away. And it turned out that it was issue 100, so it was a landmark issue. So already I was hitting the jackpot. I was hitting a book that I was perfect for,
Yep.
with a writer that I was a perfect match for, on a landmark issue. So, you know, just too much luck. And but I didn't know if this... I didn't know how long this would last. You know, there was no announcement that I was the new ongoing artist, because I'd never worked on more than 2 issues in a row. I'd gone to San Diego that year hoping to get something that was at least 4 to 6 issues in a row, just to see if I could do it, because I didn't actually know if I could maintain the pace of doing a monthly book.
Yeah.
And so this was a test. And it was a test, you know, he'd made it clear, this is the test. I've never worked with anyone from Australia before. Let's see how it goes. And so I drew issue 100, and towards the end of that, he sent me the script for issue 101. It's like, okay, so I'm drawing the next one. Cool beans.
So no contracts, no
contracts.
It
was just, you know, it's total freelance. And, you know, by about halfway through that issue, they started talking about how the arc was going to wrap up. So it sounded like I was going to be drawing that arc of Birds of Prey, which I think was a 4-issue arc. And so I was like, cool, this is happening. This seems to be, you know, continuing. And then he started talking about what the second arc would be. And Gail was talking to me about what the second arc would be. And so I was drawing that, and I ended up drawing, I think it was about 1.5 years worth straight of issues. I've never done that since. You know, I usually draw sort of about 9 to 10 issues a year comfortably. But I think I drew a good 15 or 16 issues straight without taking a break. During which time I got married and you know, all this other life stuff was happening.
Yeah.
But,
so how does that work? What was your work schedule like? 5 days a week? 7 days?
Well, it was 7 days because, you know, I was being tested and I'd never worked at that sort of level of output before. So, you know, when I finished the first issue and I got paid for it, I gave up my part-time restaurant job, and I could, you know, finally commit to drawing full-time, and I didn't know how long it would last. And it was drawing 7 days a week, and I've pretty much been drawing 7 days a week, 52 weeks a year ever since. You know, occasionally I take a week off. When I go to San Diego, I take a week off.
Yep.
And I tend to take, you know, 4 or 5 days off over Christmas, a couple of days off over New Year.
Okay.
You know, a couple of days here and there.
Because I am quite keen to talk to you about that. Like the side of things that you don't see. But from Birds of Prey, like, you just had more success, didn't you?
Yeah, well, when I went back to San Diego the year after, my editor, who I had a really lovely relationship with, he said to me, I'm going to try and get you under contract. And that was like, holy shit, you know, I've only been at the company for a year and I'm getting put under contract, and I've been under contract since. And I've been at DC Comics ever since, and I've been working on monthly books ever since. But it is a 7-day-a-week job. It's crazy.
I'm keen to touch on that, but firstly, what do you think do you owe to your success to get in that prime job, essentially, or position? Like, it's obviously you're a professional, you met deadlines, but then what else? Your style is quite unique, I think.
I was gearing my style towards a commercial market. You know, I was aiming for a particular company and a particular kind of job, so I was shaping my style to achieve that.
Yep.
You know, there are a number of incredibly creative, beautiful artists that get to work on some of these books, but they don't tend to do it on a monthly basis. They do, you know, a sort of a prestige format one-off. And they can afford to be as artistic as they want to be.
Yeah.
But if you want one of these regular monthly gigs, you kind of there's not necessarily a house style, but there are definitely more employable styles than there are quite specific employable styles. And so I was sort of learning how to craft myself into that hole. I think I was really lucky. I think being naive actually worked in my favour.
How so?
Well, I feel like a lot of people who grow up with comics and are really quite emotionally invested from a young age, because almost everyone that I know that has read comics forever, they would love to have a career writing or drawing comics. But because they're so emotionally invested, the first time that they get that criticism, it's really hard to take. And so I think it scares a lot of them off. And I just didn't have that same kind of emotional connection. I had emotional connection to the characters, but my professional determination was stronger than my emotional sensitivity.
Yep.
So I feel like that kind of worked in my favour. I think the fact that I actively didn't know what I was talking about, so I was asking questions, and I could take the criticism really constructively. It really bounced off me in terms of how it would emotionally...
So I guess you were asking questions as an outsider.
Yeah.
Not someone with emotional attachment to your Superman drawing.
Exactly. So it meant that I could absorb the information, and I was asking the right questions.
Yeah.
So I think that kind of worked in my favour. I have to say, and I know this isn't the case for all the girls trying to break in, I actually think being a girl worked in my favour. Because it was a card... I wasn't playing the girl card. The girl card was kind of being played incidentally, just by being a girl. So I think by actively not playing the card, it did actually... I feel like it did actually work in my favour. As the female audience for comics has grown.
Yeah.
The awareness of how few female creators there are in mainstream books.
Yep.
Because there are so many female creators in indie press and small press, it's kind of thrown into stark contrast how few there are in mainstream.
Yeah.
And so for that very reason, I think it worked in my favour that, the companies became aware that, we need to be aware of our female creator ratio.
And I think your artistic style, it's not girly, but it's definitely comes from a female approach.
Yeah, I feel like it...
Yeah, your work isn't ugly.
Thanks.
Some guys stuff, male artists, when they do superheroes, they're pretty ugly.
It's quite aggressive work, yeah.
Yep.
And that works for really sort of butch superhero books. That really works.
Yeah.
But
it also works for glam superhero. It doesn't work for glam superheroes.
Yeah. Well, I feel like my work was a little girlier, and one of the pieces of advice that it was never sort of directed at me in any sort of way that I felt was patronising or misogynist, was that my work was quite girly. And
I wouldn't say it was girly. I'd say it was...
Well, I think at the time it probably was.
Okay.
I don't think it is quite so much anymore.
There's strength to your work, definitely. So it's not girly, it's probably womanly or...
Well, I feel like, the female perspective is very obvious in my work. But
Which makes it
I
fresh.
actively tried to... Well, yeah, I actively tried to butch up my artwork a little bit. Because when male artists produce really beautiful feminine work, it's seen as really arty. And therefore they get a lovely, a great reputation as producing beautiful artwork, and it is celebrated. Where if a girl does girly artwork, it's just seen as girly.
Yeah, okay.
And so I sort of was finding ways to kind of butch up my style without losing what I feel like I was contributing by being a female artist. So I was very open to adapting to get the job, you know, rather than demanding that the job be happy with what I was producing.
Yep. So you kind of said that it was mostly luck that got you where you are, but you've just described all these things that you've done to evolve and improve and adapt for the job.
Well, yes. You know, I think that was what I contributed to, you know. I'm a firm believer that you not necessarily produce your own luck, but you certainly promote the opportunities for luck to find you. And I was trying to do everything I could to create the opportunities.
Yep. Was there ever a point where you thought you might give up?
No.
Yep.
No, it happened really quick, you know, from the point of deciding that this is what I was going to do to actually getting a job at DC Comics was 4.5 years. That's not very long, considering I spent 3 of those years working professionally, just sort of in the peripheral.
Yep. But did you find that you could never rest on your laurels? Like you had to continually force yourself to improve?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I still kind of feel that now. You know,
yeah.
When you're producing a monthly book on a licensed character, there is a certain amount of just getting the work done. You have to make the deadlines.
Yeah, like the costumes don't change. You know how to
do them. You just have to, you know, and occasionally I find myself phoning it in. And one of the comments I've heard in any professional industry, particularly creative industries, is that if you can produce 60% of your best 80% of the time, it's much better than producing 80% of your best 60% of the time. So it's like if I can produce 60% of my best 80% of the time and the other 20% I try to go for, you know, 100%, then I'm doing a really good job. And I'm a bit of a perfectionist, so I'm very aware of pages or days where I'm just like, I'm phoning this in and I don't like it, but you have to phone it in because no one's paying as much attention as I am.
Yeah, okay. I was going to ask you, like, does anyone else notice? Like, do the editors?
Not really. You know, like the upside is that I regularly get reviewed really nicely. You know, reviewers have been very generous, I feel. And so I feel like, you know, the hard work is paying off. People are noticing, but they're not really noticing the detail in terms of the preciousness that I might have over the things that are important to me. They won't necessarily see that, but they'll get the idea of the work that's gone into it. So, you know, the things that are really important to me, I think everyone sees quite obviously. You know, my acting background comes into play quite a lot when it comes to acting out the characters in the books. You know, I try to sort of find the right emotional resonance with each scene, particularly the sort of character moments.
Yep. You know, in animation studios, we have a mirror on each of our desks, so we can pull the faces.
It doesn't surprise me because I do the same every now and then when I'm drawing a really specific expression. You know, something that's really nuanced. I need to get the mirror out and look at what the hell my face is doing. Because that's what I do when I'm going through the scripts. I act out all the parts. And I try to get into character and I will act out all the parts and I'll do it physically as well because that will sort of inform the body language. It sometimes informs the poses that I want to put people in.
It's a weird, in an animation studio, when this happens, like, out of the corner of your eye, you catch someone doing that.
Yeah.
And so you kind of go, what are you doing?
Yeah.
And they're just doing something, or...
Yeah, well, I work in my sunroom at home, and I'm on the first floor, and I imagine every now and then, you know, someone walking by. It's a quiet street, but every now and then someone must catch me in the window pulling some weird pose and just think, what the hell is that person doing?
Should you use photo reference?
No, I try as little as possible to use photo reference, just because it slows me down.
Yep.
You know, if I'm drawing something that I've never drawn before, like a particular kind of crane at a dockyard, I'll Google reference the kind of thing that I'm looking for.
Yep.
And, you know, I will use that as a reference. But I've got a pretty good visual memory, so once I've sort of clocked something a few times, I tend to be pretty good at sort of drawing off the top of my head.
Okay.
And, you know, when I'm doing these sort of action poses or you know, just sort of standing around poses, I don't necessarily need to look in the mirror to see what my body's doing. It's more about sort of finding where my balance is and what my limbs are doing, and finding where my hips and my shoulders are in relation to each other. Because I find just sort of doing the motion, I don't need to see it, I just need to feel it.
Yeah.
And then I can draw it. That seems to be enough for me. But sometimes the face is the thing that I might need to look at sometimes.
Yep. And so I guess that's a nice segue into your drawing process.
Yeah.
So do you ink your work, or is it pencils? No. Yeah. So you work quite traditionally in terms of comic art?
Oh, so old school. I'm so old school. Partly because I am not terribly computer literate at all. You know, technical advances that a lot of people are jumping on, I'm so far behind the curveball. Partly because I don't really have the headspace for it, but I also don't have the time to learn. As the technology is developing, I'm hoping by the time I've got some time to learn, it'll be so straightforward that there won't be that much learning to do. No, I'm old school. I'm like a pencil, a ruler, an eraser, French curve, and I'm good to go.
Do you use blue pencils, or?
I do use blue pencil. The way my process is, once I've read the script a couple of times, I start doing little thumbnails in the margins of the script, which sort of give me an idea of how to break down the page. And the blue pencil, I go straight onto the page, onto the sort of finished artboard.
And you're working at like normal traditional comic page?
Yeah, comic page is, I think, 11 inches by 17 inches.
So
it's
American. A little bit under from A3.
Yeah, it's slightly different. It's slightly taller, slightly narrower.
Yep.
And
there's specific types of brands that you use, aren't there, that you have to...
Specific, sorry?
Types of paper.
Yeah, well, yeah.
Pages.
DC sends me pages, so I don't need to buy stuff. They have smooth and rough surface paper, and as a penciler, I prefer the rough surface. You get a nice tooth with the pencil, but the ink is like smooth because it gives a good clean line. And when you're working on these monthly books, it becomes quite a production line.
Yep.
You know, the writer is at the top of the food chain and the penciler is the second one down. You're the first artistic person interpreting the script. And then after that, there's an inker who's cleaning up your work. It's really a process that you need to go through to have it really clean and stark for good print quality. And then the colorist does their bit on computer, and I feel like colorists are really underrated at the moment.
Yeah.
You know, they contribute so much to the finished product.
Yep.
In a way that they didn't before computer coloring was around.
It can make or break a book.
I absolutely make or break a book. So the process is kind of, once I've done my little thumbnails, I go straight onto the finished art page. Onto the front of the page, I sort of break down the layout of my page, and just in the loosest of pencils, I kind of break down my composition. And I work on a light box, so I flip the page over. Once I've got my very basic composition down, I flip the page over, and I do all of my roughs on the same page. I do all of my roughs on the back of the page. So that's where I make all of my mistakes. That's where I make all my changes. That's where I get all my bodies right and my proportions right. And
Is it weird though, like when you flip a drawing or an image,
Yeah.
like it does look weird?
Well, that was kind of why I started doing it. My eyesight's really bad, so I work really close to the page. And when I first started drawing again really regularly at the beginning of sort of, pursuing the comic book thing, I find everything's got a slant to the page because I work so close to it. Everything had a slight slant, but
Do you
because
work on a drawing board?
yeah,
Yeah.
but because it's the same slant all the time, your eye gets so adjusted to it that you stop seeing it. And I found if I flipped my page over and suddenly the slant was in the opposite direction, I'd suddenly see the mistake. And so it started off as a device I was using to correct this slant that I was giving everything.
And did that warp the perspective? Or
No, it was kind of more on bodies and faces. It wasn't really about sort of background perspective. It was just about correcting. I'd find all of my faces had a slight lean to them because I was too close to the page when I drew them. And when I flipped the page over on the light box, I could see it straight away in a way that I couldn't see it if I just kept looking at the front of the page. And so it started off as a means to correct that. And I don't do it at all anymore. My eye is adjusted. I know how to not. I know how to not do that. I try to work further away from the page. It doesn't always work, but I now don't do it like that. But I got so used to working on the back of the page and sort of seeing things both ways that it's now not confusing to me at all.
yeah, as part of your process.
It's part of my process.
Yeah.
So
instead of working like a rough page and putting that under your final page.
yeah,
your-
I did do that for a little while, but I found that I didn't like the waste of paper.
Yeah.
I just sort of felt like I'm wasting so much paper.
And you're left with stacks of
And
roughs.
Stacks of roughs, and I just thought this is ridiculous. I should just be doing all the roughs on the back of the page. I have a problem with wastage.
Yeah.
It would drive me crazy. And so, yeah, when you see my original art pages, the back of the page is just full of information. All of my perspective lines are there. There's whole areas where I've drawn a whole panel and then changed my mind and rubbed it all out and drawn something different. Or I've made mistakes, or just lots and lots and lots of rough information is done on the back of the page. And then when I flip the page back over to the front, there's just a little blue line there that's pretty easy to rub out. But I've got this nice clean page with all of my rough information on the back. It's a nice clean page where I can do my finish pencils really cleanly, really tightly. Like my finish pencils are really tight for most comic book artists. I see a lot of work, and I don't know anyone that pencils as tightly as I do. And that comes out of, it's not so much being a perfectionist. It's not a good thing. It's a bad thing because it comes from being really anal about the work and about communicating my lines as cleanly as possible to the inker, so that they don't misinterpret what I'm trying to do.
Is that because you've yet to build up trust with your inker? Or
No, because I'm working with a guy at the moment who I've worked with for a year now, and he's great. I have complete faith in him, but I'm just set in my ways.
Yeah.
And the inker that I worked with before him, I worked with for 5 years. And again, I completely trusted him, but I was set in my ways. But occasionally you find yourself working with a brand new inker.
Yeah.
Or you find yourself working with a fill-in inker. And some of them do a fantastic job and some of them do a not fantastic job.
It's a weird relationship, the pencil and inker.
Yeah, because an inker can either enhance your work,
Or destroy
fuck
it.
your work up,
Yeah.
or they can completely interpret what you've put down. And my ideal inker is someone who gets all of my lines right, but they add sort of textural elements that I can't necessarily achieve in pencil. Things like smudges, things like ink spray, things that you can't do in pencil. You can't achieve it. So that's my idea.
So when you finish your finished pencil page, how does that get to the inker?
I scan it in.
Okay.
So I scan it in, I drop it into the DCFTP site.
Yeah. And then what does the ink on?
He downloads it and prints it out on smooth paper because he likes working on smooth, and he prints it in blue line. So he prints it in blue.
Yeah.
And I'm presuming he also prints out a black and white or a grey scale copy. So, anything that he can't quite make out in blue, he can see clearly in proper pencil. And I'm working with a chap at the moment called Trevor Scott, no relation. I've met him once. And he's great, he adds a sort of real modern, slightly rough element to my pencils, which works really well for the book that we're on. And he adds sort of great sort of textural elements, which I hope for. But at the same time, all of my line work, I can see my lines in his ink. So all the characters look exactly how I want them. The hard work that I've put into producing these sort of finicky, very precious finished pencils is there in the finished product.
Yeah. So I guess let's kind of wrap it up. I don't know how long we've been going for.
No idea.
No, but you're probably hungry.
Right.
So you've made it now.
I have.
Well,
I've made it.
So how does that feel?
It's pretty bloody good, actually.
Yeah.
It's nice to, it's in a sort of day-to-day level. It's nice to just have a regular job. It's really nice to just sort of have one of these great regular jobs.
It's a regular job, but it's a 7-day-a-week job.
It's a 7-day-a-week job.
So how's that going?
Well, I actually don't mind because I love what I do, even though, I go through phases where I'm pretty bored. And it's not necessarily because... when you work at the same thing all day, every day, you don't always feel creative. Some days I just...
That's why they're weekends, so you don't have to work every day.
Well, when you're working on the book that I'm on at the moment is particularly intense in terms of the amount of world building and designing and the level of detail that's required of this book. It really does need me to draw 7 days a week.
So what's your work-life balance like? I asked Christian this question, and he said there is none.
I try to only socialise at night.
Do you keep strict work hours?
Yes. I used to. I'm a bit of a night owl naturally, but my husband has a day job, so I try to keep to office hours. So I'll start work at 9. I finish work at 6. And on the weekends, I tend to start whenever I start, which can be, 10 o'clock, it can be 11 o'clock. And generally, unless we've got plans, I work until 6.
Are you able, because you work from home, to, when you finish at 6, to walk away?
Yep. Occasionally, I know I need to work more.
Yep.
If I've got a really sort of pressing deadline, I'll do like a night. I'll go back and work at night. But that's not regular. It's semi-often, but it's not regular. It's like once a month.
Yeah. And what happens if you're sick or you want a holiday?
Well, that's why I only work 9 issues a year. It's like my workload. I work on a monthly book, and it's 20 pages a month. So essentially, the idea is that you need to produce an issue every 4 weeks. And I can do that, but I can't sustain that.
Yep.
So I find it a natural working pace for me is to produce 5 pages every 7 days. And if I can do that, which is still, an issue every 4 weeks, and add into that the time that I'll take off for conventions, the time that I'll take off for sick days, the time that I'll take off because I'm just not in the mood today. I need to have a day off, which doesn't happen very often. I tend to try and work it as many days as possible. If I take a couple of issues off a year, so I draw sort of 9 to 10 issues a year, that tends to balance itself out. And I actually find that I work at my most comfortable and consistently when I'm producing an issue every 5 weeks rather than every 4. So I'm still sort of working the same hours but I'm just not working at the same pace for all those hours.
Yep.
It's just a slightly more, I won't say relaxed because it's not necessarily relaxed, but it's just an easier pace to maintain long term.
And do you feel fairly secure with DC Comics, or are you do you feel like you need to kind of shop or keep your one eye open for the future?
It kind of goes through phases. A couple of years ago, I didn't feel so secure.
Yep.
As they were kind of restructuring the company and rebooting the DC universe, the DC line. But once I was attached to the book that I was on, there was a little bit of a public outcry when I wasn't on one of the new books that I think surprised them. It certainly surprised me. And it encouraged them to sort of get me on the kind of book that I was asking for. And the response to that book, which I've now been on for a year, has been so positive that I feel a lot more secure there than I did before.
Well, it's a very fan-based industry.
Yeah.
Fan-supported.
And the fans are loud. The internet has given them a voice that they didn't have previously.
Well, even when you got your first kind of look-in, when you posted the work on that message board, it was the fan support that got you the job. So, I mean, you do lots of conventions. That's why you're down in Melbourne. So that's a big part. Do you see that as a big part of the work in terms of promoting yourself, selling yourself?
It's not so much like a little bit of it is promotion, but more of it is connecting with readers that you've already got. I find that the biggest thing for conventions with me is connecting with people who are already following my career and meeting people who are at that early stages of wanting to career build themselves. Because, again, there still isn't a significant industry here.
Yep.
There's a little more of an industry now than there was. And there are a lot more people living in Australia working in the American industry than there used to be. There's quite a few of us now. But it's still a very daunting career choice. And one of the big things that I get out of convention is meeting these young people who are sort of pursuing this as an idea, but they don't quite know how realistic it is. And when they see someone who's working at one of the big companies, particularly, a girl from the other side of the planet, from where the industry is, who came into it with no idea what she was doing, that's kind of a pretty encouraging story. That, it is actually possible to get one of these jobs.
Yeah. And not just get work. There's quite a number of guys in Australia who have gotten work. Yeah. But not a full-time job, essentially.
Yeah, and there are actually, yes, there are a number of people that are working sort of part-time in the American industry. There are quite a few people that are working full-time in the American industry. They're just not working consistently or at the same kind of... they're still sort of growing their career in terms of the companies that they want to work for and the pay rate that they might be able to get.
Yep. So you've essentially got a permanent job with the company as much as you can be being...
Pretty much.
Yeah, working in another country on a contractual basis.
Pretty much.
Yeah, without getting sick days and...
Pretty much. And at the moment, I'm the only person with a monthly book at one of the big companies. So that's why I feel pretty lucky.
Yeah. And so you when you look into the future, are you satisfied with superheroes and working for DC? Or
yeah, I do see myself staying at DC. Sort of, I feel like I have quite a long future with them, but I do feel like I'm at the point soon. I feel like it's coming up soon where for my own creative satisfaction, and also what I can continue to bring to them creatively, is if I start doing little bits and pieces of stuff not with them and not with superheroes.
Yeah.
So, maybe when this contract expires, or maybe when I finish working on the book that I'm currently on now, if an opportunity comes up to do, a shorter run on something not superhero, something where I can work in black and white, where I can maybe do some painting involved in it, something where I can do something different to what I do now, which will sort of be creatively satisfying to me in a completely different way.
Yeah, but it feeds back into...
But it will feed back into, my future superhero work. Yeah. And, maybe even, there are a number of characters now sort of having been educated quite a bit on the industry and the various characters. I'm very open to the idea of sort of working on other licensed characters at other companies, because they have their own flavour, and there might be something that I can add to that too.
So have you gotten to draw Wonder Woman?
I have. She has managed to pop up in pretty much every single book that I've worked on. Nice. I did work on the Wonder Woman title for a few issues when Gail Simone was wrapping up her long run. We had hoped to work on the book for a while together, but her run was sort of coming to quite an abrupt end, and so she got me on for her last story arc. I did a Black as Night Wonder Woman miniseries with Greg Rucka. He's one of my favourite writers. But she also appeared in... I think she appeared in Secret Six. She appeared in Secret Six. I think she appeared in Birds of Prey at some point. She's appeared in Teen Titans. She's appeared in Earth 2, which is what I'm working on right now.
And was it as fun to draw as
Absolutely. One of the problems is, though, one of the things that I love drawing about her is her hair. I get really sort of... It becomes this hypnotic trance-like state that I go into drawing this crazy detailed hair. But when you're drawing it over and over and over again, like 5 panels a page for 20 pages an issue, I start kicking myself in the face for just, why have I decided to do this and make it so hard for myself? But at the same time, I can't not do it. Just part of that sort of finicky, precious,
Well, or living the dream.
Yeah, not being able to let it go.
Yeah. Well, I guess that's a good place to leave it. Thanks, Nicola.
Thanks, Scott.
What have you got coming out? Where can people check out your work?
Just continuing on with Earth 2. We're in the middle of a story arc right now where Dr. Fate is being revealed, and the story arc afterwards, which I'm working on right now, is like a big war arc, which is pretty fun. And next year, I've got a couple of sort of DC adjacent, well, sort of at DC, sort of little things that are going to come out. I don't know that I can talk about them yet.
Come on, give us a scoop.
I got to design something for the collectibles, the DC collectibles market, which was super fun.
What, action figure or?
A something. A something, I can't say. But yes, that will be released next year. I designed it already. I've already seen its development since then. And it's looking really exciting.
Wow, you heard it here first, another Digsville exclusive. And so where can people find you on the internet? You don't have a website, do you?
I don't have a website. I have a Facebook account, which is pretty tragic at the moment. I'm hoping to get an intern in to come and help me run my online profile, because I don't really participate in it too much. But yes, I have a Facebook account. I do try to post out on there as regularly as possible. I've just signed up to Instagram, so I can start posting some artwork a little more regularly. Okay. Under NICOLA SCOTT Art.
Yeah, so it's not just your brunches.
No.
Yeah. Oh, Craig on the couch.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's trying to sort of keep it work related. And
yeah, and if you Google search your name, you come up.
It comes up pretty quickly.
Yeah. Nice. All right. Thanks, Nick.
Thanks, Scott.
Well, there you go. I hope you enjoyed Nicola's story. Oh, and here you go. that little bit of information that she was reluctant to give at the end about this special project coming up next year. I'm going to give you a major hint. It has something to do with Batman. Now, it's not Batman the comics, but it has to do with Batman. There you go. You heard it here first on Diggsville the podcast. As always, you can find us on Twitter, Diggsville Pod, and my personal Twitter account, Phraseville, and you can find me at sdfraser.com. Alrighty, that's it.